It's 10 times the terror.
Hello and welcome to 10 Times the Terror.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to 10 Times the Terror. I'm James.
And this is Paul.
And on today's episode, Dad, if you're walking outside and you look up at the sky and there's a cloud that isn't moving, well, you might want to go ahead and say nope. Because today we're talking about Jordan Peele's latest, Nope, which was released on July 22nd in theaters. And it's still playing in theaters, but I believe it's also available to rent on direct. So if you on digital, sorry. So if you can watch it that way, you have that option. It's the third film written and directed by Jordan Peele. It stars Keke Palmer, Daniel Kaluuya, Steven Yeun, Brendan Perea. And I guess we'll give our kind of initial thoughts, but also I think to really discuss this movie, we're going to have to go full spoilers. So if you've not seen Nope, you can pause this episode, come back to it after you've seen it. We're going to really kind of get into it and what the movie's saying, what's going on here. But Dad, I'll start with you. What did you think of Nope?
I was very impressed. I mean, to me, it's a film about exploitation of animals, of people, of social settings. All of that came across very, very strongly, coming from an African American director, especially. So I see it with that whole theme of exploitation, and then the negative impacts of what that represents, and the spaceship, which is not just not just a means of transportation, but is the alien life force itself. Is like something that's coming to take its vengeance on the exploitation that's going on planet Earth. That'd be my take on it. I thought it was very effective. And then quotes from everything from King Kong to Val Lewton. I think you James, you mentioned even Jaws, which just add to the resonance and the richness of the whole film. So I think it's a film that says, how do we live our lives? What things do we take for granted? What about exploitation? When you start to think about the West itself as an example of exploitation of all the land that was taken from indigenous peoples, the so-called American Indians. So I think a lot of that was going on there, and it very, very much food for thought.
Yeah, I love this movie. I think this is absolutely great, and I agree that it's about exploitation. I think it's very much a spectacle. I mean, it's a summer blockbuster with a July release date. It's shot with IMAX cameras. In fact, I just read that this is the first horror movie ever shot with IMAX cameras, which I think is really cool. But yeah, I think it's a spectacle about spectacle. I mean, I think UFO movies, by their very nature, are about people looking up at the sky and being sort of drawn to this quite literally unidentified flying object. And this movie is that, and it really gets into the idea of how we benefit from spectacle, what we, as you say, exploit from spectacle, and kind of the sort of negative side effects of our obsession with trying to capture things and profit off things, both in good and bad ways, and the way all of the characters sort of like are exposed to this UFO, and also how it impacts them is really cool. And I agree that there's lots of film references. I mean, Jordan Peele is clearly a big movie aficionado. Clearly, I think War of the Worlds and Close Encounters. You mentioned King Kong. I think M. Night Shyamalan's Signs is also an influence. But for me, the one that came across the most is Jaws. I mean, I think there is a clear Spielbergian kind of flair to this whole movie, but I think the way the camera sort of just goes across the whole sky, and we see this as you said, this alien kind of moving in and out of clouds, totally reminded me of Jaws with seeing the fin in the water. We even get the moment early on in the film where we see what we assume to be these kind of alien Martians that very clearly we find out is actually kids dressing up. That to me was also just a nod to Jaws with the kids with the pretending to be the shark. But I that's kind of what I love about Jordan Peele and his kind of approach to genre filmmaking is he's taking all these kind of familiar ideas and makes this very kind of weaves together this very complex and intricate story that is so kind of fun to unpack with how he sets things up, how he shows things, how he kind of misdirects. And I mean, every time I watch this movie, I get so much more out of it, and kind of I like that he doesn't kind of hold your hand through the story. He gives you a lot of disparate elements that at first you're kind of like, what does that really mean? Like we can go into like the whole sequence with like the Gordy's home and what that means and how it all kind of ties together. I think it makes for a really fun and compelling watch.
Yeah, it's the whole nature of the West. I think here symbolically represents the exploitation. Who are the people who live here? The people who are presently there are not the people who originally came there. And the idea of having an African American cowboy kind of merges those two realities. The one being the obvious, the exploitation, but the other being the secondary owners of the scene, the new tenants, if you will, those who have come to replace the original owners of the land. So again, and exploitation to me just runs throughout the entire film, again and again and again and again, and that exploitation sows the seeds of its own destruction too. You see that from the very beginning with the chimpanzee, and that whole thing where he gets the noises set him off, which is a direct quote from King Kong, but also that idea that the chimpanzee is not some nice little pet, but is quite frankly a dangerous animal, and there's not a proper sense of how much danger is involved in this whole way of living. And then, the whole way the town focuses on the prairie and the prairie back on the town, it just ruminates again and again on how these forces of exploitation and control and dynamism take over and become pervasive, and you're left with the hollow substance of what's been what remains from the kind of the colonial exploitation. This is now the land that's been claimed by the people who did not work it for centuries. It's been claimed by the newcomers, the exploiters. That I think it comes out again and again and again, but it doesn't become redundant. I mean, he kind of factors that in different ways. Starting with the Asian American guy who witnesses the attack of the monkeys at the beginning, and then at the later on when he's an adult, he's doing the same kind of stuff over again with people. He hasn't learned the lesson. All of that is just very, very provocative, and I think very insightful.
Well, I think too, like the way you're talking about the sort of exploitation, I think you also can't separate the sort of the way this movie's kind of critiquing Hollywood and Hollywood's forgotten history, because obviously we have OJ and Emerald are the two main characters who are part of this Haywood Hollywood ranch, and the whole idea is they keep and they're trainers of horses, and they're also selling horses to be used for Hollywood, but they keep referencing over and over that the first motion picture ever is this black jockey on a horse, and how everyone remembers the guy who shot the film, which is a white person, but nobody remembers the name of the jockey. Kind of like that to me is so blatantly clear an example of how Hollywood chooses to exploit the sort of maybe the minorities, if you will, but don't actually give the credit. And even when later on in the film they have like the cinematographer come to help them, well, he of course then dies trying to get the impossible shot, quote unquote. Then we have like the TMZ character who's trying to also profit off this and dies while he's trying to get his camera. And then you mentioned the character Jupe, who's this child star who witnessed this horrific incident where they're filming with this live chimpanzee, and a balloon goes off which sets the chimpanzee off and kills and mauls several of the cast members. And he's, as a kid, witnesses this horrific event. But as you said, he kind of is taking the wrong lesson from it, because he thinks that, well, the chimpanzee didn't kill him, so maybe he has this like connection. But no, it's a wild animal, and wild animals don't always act the way you expect them to. But he's trying to control and lure the alien, well, then that kind of backfires, and then all these people die. Which that to me leads to one of the most horrific moments in the whole film, where we see all the people being sucked up into the alien, and we're not entirely sure what we're looking at, but they're in this clearly claustrophobic, you know, environment inside the creature, which becomes this almost like digestive tract where they're being essentially like churned alive, and you just hear the wail of their screaming. And then later on throughout the film, as the alien flies around the sky, you can hear the sound effects of the screams. And then, as we learn later on, as it sort of is like extracting the waste, they have little objects in the sky falling out of the sky, which also leads to one of my favorite images of the film, which is the whole like blood raining down the house. That to me is such an awesome image. But again, going back to like the critique of Hollywood, I think it's also kind of celebrating some of the unsung heroes of Hollywood. So I mean, we have OJ in this movie, who's again both a cast or sort of a stunt crew member and a black guy. And by the end of the movie, he sort of becomes that John Wayne Clint Eastwood cowboy who is the one kind of like riding the horse, and even at the very end, you have that kind of Ennio Morricone-esque music playing. Like that to me is an example of how the stunt people are in many ways the actual heroes of the movies. And what I like too is, you mentioned earlier, Dad, how the movie kind of deals a lot with animals. I see that as a recurring thread in all of Jordan Peele's films, where the animals are in a way sort of like the harbingers of death. I mean, you had the deer in Get Out, you had the rabbits in Us, and so this film you have the chimpanzee, but you also have the horses. The horses play a very vital role. And you can look at the alien as a sort of animal and sort of has this animalistic behavior. And OJ makes the point of like, you can't tame a predator, but you can come to an agreement with it. And they figure out, that at a certain point it's like the way to kind of not get sucked up by the alien is to not look directly at it, which he sort of learned from the horses early on, where it's like don't look directly at it, and that's when they kind of act out of control. So you think that you're in control and you're taming the animal, but you're not actually in control.
Yeah, and I think that's you're invading the alien territory. I just see an awful lot of King Kong in this. It's Carl Denham and his group that they make their way to Skull Island. They're invading a forbidden area, an unknown area, and then they want to bring Kong back to New York. Or they do the reverse, and the whole thing ends in catastrophe. I think that picks up on so much stuff, and King Kong is a metaphor for everything from racial depictions to the Great Depression. It fits up on all of those fronts, and I think that carries over here into Nope.
And not only that, but in King Kong, when they bring him back to New York, the same idea is that they want to make a spectacle out of him. They want it to be this big attraction that people come to see. So it's thinking that you have control. I think, and even another similar monster movie would be like Godzilla, where the monster is almost also representative of like nature. You're trying to control nature, and you're not. And once it kind of lets loose, it's going to just wreak havoc.
Right.
And I love too that I think, to me, like what I like so much about Jordan Peele is like he's such a true like image maker. I mean, I think of how the way this movie begins. We get that kind of scene from the Gordy's home incident, but we don't have any context. We see the shoe standing up. We see what looks like a body kind of hidden away by the couch, and we see this monkey wearing a birthday hat and covered in blood. And it's such a provocative image that kind of really gets your attention. And again, it's not till kind of later on that we sort of understand what goes on. But I just think about like moments like that, and like I mentioned, like the blood raining down the house. Like there's just such great kind of image making, and I think even going a step further with this idea of spectacle, I think about how we as audiences watch horror movies and also movies in general, but specifically horror movies. Like we're often sometimes seeing images we know we shouldn't be seeing, but we can't look away, and there becomes this kind of this kind of voyeuristic relationship between audience and movies, and I think about someone like Hitchcock. I think really tapped into that idea of voyeurism.
Sure.
But I think, the idea of spectacle is like, and again, you can obviously apply this to so much of what we see in obviously the news and just our current climate, where a lot of times we are seeing things we shouldn't be seeing, but we can't look away. And I love that the way to sort of like defeat, if you will, this alien is to look away. You're supposed to not look directly at it, and the ones that do look straight up at it are the ones that get killed.
Yeah, it's and I think that there's that power of the unseen forces. We never really see what's inside the spaceship. We have, you say, you have the image of the people being drawn up into it, but we never really get a sense of what the spaceship internally looks like. But that doesn't mean that we are entitled to have that either. You know, it's a different life form.
Absolutely. And I love too, like, obviously the title of this movie, Nope. I think Jordan Peele has sort of like alluded to, like, this is supposed to be, you know, people's reaction when something bad happens. You go, nope, nope. And I can't help but not think of even like the Orson Welles, you know, radio telling of War of the Worlds and how quickly people reacted to it, whether they're packing everything up, they're moving out, they're just like, nope, we're not going to stick around, and only to find out that this is just a dramatized reading. But like, I think Jordan Peele is so smart and is so in tune to all of this that he's taking all of these elements and creates something that just feels very, very unique, and especially in an era where we get so many franchises and so many sequels. Like, I think it's so exciting that we have a movie like this that is so original, that has the scale it has, and also, as I mentioned before, is not, you know, overly explaining everything to you. It doesn't take the audience for granted. It's willing to give you all the elements and let you kind of put things together.
Yeah, we're left with a lot of unanswered questions in the nature of the whole thing. Not the least of which is what is the purpose of this spaceship? Why has it come?
Right, and you could also just again apply that back to wild animals. Like, why do they do what we think we can understand animals, but then something sets them off, will trigger something that we weren't expecting, and we can't always understand that.
Right, but there's something primordial about them, you know, that's much more ancient than we are.
Exactly, and again, very just animalistic.
Mm-hmm.
I also think too, we have, as you mentioned, you know, we have this ranch, which is where OJ and M live, and that's where they have all these horses, and it's in this kind of like, you know, very kind of rural part of California. But then you also have this attraction, this Jupiter's Claim, which is a ranch that's kind of in front of the actual ranch, which could be another sort of critique of how, yeah, like you're taking the land and you're pushing the natives kind of out while you're sort of setting up this kind of fake, you know, attraction version of what the real thing is.
And again, you're exploiting the land, exploiting the setting, exploiting the whole nature of what the West has become. Yeah, Buffalo Bill's big ticket extravaganza.
And not only that, but you're literally buying these horses to feed to the alien. Like,
yeah, right. How bizarre is that?
That's the whole reason why he wants to buy the horses, so he can essentially sacrifice them to the alien. And even little touches like yeah, during that scene when we see the kind of Jupiter's Claim attraction, at one point Jupe makes the comment of like, you know, in 1 hour from now, like, you're gonna leave this place different, or something to that regard. And that, if you look at the runtime, that's the exact length of the rest of the movie. Like, I just love those little touches that Jordan Peele kind of incorporates, that like you kind of pick away at when you kind of revisit these kind of movies.
Yeah.
Okay. Well then, yeah, I guess we can kind of sort of wrap up here. I think we're both pretty high on this movie. Are there any closing remarks you have about Nope?
I think it's just very unsettling that it begins with our not quite seeing the attack of the chimp. Throws you way off. And I think there are a number of Val Lewton touches, long hallways, dark shadows, and even the case where at one point the horse, yeah, out of the solitude makes a you know, sound, which is taken right from Val Lewton's The Body Snatcher. Exactly. You know, never mind the bus thing from Cat People. It's right there in The Body Snatcher. One of the fun things in this is to look at all of the film references that Jordan Peele has in this.
Absolutely. And what I like too about him as just as a horror filmmaker, as someone going to scale, he's very clever and I think responsible with how he does his scares. He doesn't go for cheap schlock. Even the scene with the chimpanzee with Gordy, is very like disturbing. I think it's a very disturbing scene. But I love that like so much of what happens is off screen. It's either or like the camera cuts to black and we just hear the sound, or we can see again like the sort of side of the body, but we don't actually see what happens. That to me is just so much more effective than any kind of blood and gore. And like I mentioned, the scene with seeing the people being like literally suffocating and being churned alive in the alien is just very smart, very I think impactful kind of scares versus any kind of like jump scare of any kind.
Yeah, no, I think that's all of that plays into a very rich tapestry, if you will, of images and ideas and indeed threats.
Absolutely. And I think in my closing remarks, like one thing that I've heard Jordan Peele say like in interviews when kind of like coming up with this idea for the story is that he wrote this and conceived this during the pandemic, during a time when the future of movies was looking very bleak and very especially movie theaters was looking very uncertain. And so he wanted to make a spectacle, the kind of movie you do go out and see on the biggest screen and talk about with your friends and really kind of pick apart. And I think he achieved that. I mean, I really love this movie, and I'm so happy this movie exists because I feel like it's such a unique film and such a unique filmmaker, and especially like I said, in a summer that for I think for the most part has been pretty underwhelming, and again it's very we're seeing so many kind of safe choices with the kind of movies that are getting made. I think this is such a bold swing, both for the filmmaker as well as for the studio. And so I'm glad this movie exists, and I definitely recommend seeing it.
Well, I agree with that.
Okay, well, I think that concludes our discussion on Nope. Hopefully, we gave you some food for thought, and hopefully, you have your own kind of thoughts on this film. And that'll be it for this week's episode of 10 Times the Terror. Again, I'm James.
And I'm Paul.
We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to
It's 10 Times the Terror,
the podcast.
One of my favorite films ever. Let's do that for again.
Thank you for listening to 10 Times the Terror. This podcast would not be possible without listeners like you. You can find out more about our podcast by visiting our website, 10timestheterror.com. That's 10xtheterror.com.